Hey everybody, it is 2 p.m. and we'll get going. Welcome everyone to this Community Foundation CEO Roundtable with our focus on impact investing. This is part one. We are really excited to be with you today. This is a partnership with the Council and CEONet, and it's always a joy to work with these folks. Eric and Christy, thank you so much for your time and for being here. I'm really excited about this conversation, so I am thrilled to see the attendance and now everybody that's in this room. So thank you for being here. Just a few reminders, everybody. Please enable your video if you're able to. And if you could hover over your name either on the screen or on your name under participants, you can rename it to add your community foundation name and your pronouns. It's super helpful for monitoring the chat. I can share the chat notes later. And everyone, just so you know, this is going to be recorded. You will have access to this and it will be shared and posted on our website. So if by any reason you want to just catch anything that we said, or if you want to rewatch it later or share with your staff, feel free to do so. We usually post it between 2 to 3 business days after the live conversation. And with that, please use the raise hand feature or the chat to ask any questions at any time. This is an open conversation, an open discussion, and this is your space. So please feel free to use it. Thank you and welcome everyone. Eric, up to you.
Thanks, Daniela. Thanks again for joining us for the CEONet COF's Roundtable on Impact Investing. I'm Eric Ozeppa, the CEO of the Longmont Community Foundation. I'm really proud to be joined by Christy Knaus of the CEONet Board and President of the Community Foundation of Greater Des Moines, and Daniela Rodriguez-Ramph, the Director of Leadership, Development, and Training for the Council on Foundations. There she is.
My camera was off. Way to flag it for me, folks. All right.
Awesome. Didn't get your back there. Sorry. We are also joined by our discussants today about impact investing. Susan Hamel, the executive in residence with the Minnesota Council on Foundations. Stuart Comstock-Gay, President and CEO of the Delaware Community Foundation, as well as Marcia Pope, President, Topeka Community Foundation. This webinar, as you know, is in 2 parts. Some of you may know this, some of you may not, but we have a second edition coming on the 28th. And this first edition is really kind of more of a basic look at impact investing. So I think Susan and others are going to share their challenges and some of the trepidations maybe from donors and board members about impact investing. And so we've asked them to kind of share stories. And then later on, the second one on the 28th, we're going to be kind of delving in deeper, having you ask us some more deeper questions about impact investing. We will have ample time, obviously, along to have the chat and raise your hand and that sort of thing to ask questions along the way. But this is really for you, and it really you don't have a lot of time, so we got to really get into it. So with that, I'm going to call on one of the discussants to lead off and kind of share the story. And Susan, with that, I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you to go first. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much for that, Eric. Thank you all. Pleasure to be here today. Thank you, Christy. My name is Susan Hamel. I am the executive in residence of the Minnesota Council on Foundations. I am in my 6th year in that role, and I'm on call to the 150 members of the Minnesota Council of Foundations. Pretty much I set aside Mondays to do that work, where foundations of all sizes and types can call me and ask their burning impact investing questions. But I actually got my start in impact investing 30 years ago. And Eric did ask us all to tell you our life stories. So I'll just march through 30 years. No, but 30 years ago, nobody had heard of impact investing. But I worked for Prudential and they called it social investing. And they're based in Newark, New Jersey in the 90s. And there was no grocery store in Newark. It hadn't been one since the riots of the 60s. When Newark went up in flames. And so we worked on the first grocery store to go up in Newark. And let me tell you, I was hooked. A place and race and making a positive impact with money. After having been on the Wall Street side of things at Prudential, and just, it's all about making money and getting my CFA, my Chartered Financial Analyst, to join the folks who wanted to do both, make an impact and make money at the same time. Flipped a switch in my brain that has been flipped ever since. About 10 years ago, it was a community foundation who first called me the St. Paul, Minnesota Foundation, who said, Susan, we've got a problem in our metro with the lack of jobs in the East Metro. What can we, a foundation, do about it? And don't you know something about that weird impact investing thing they're talking about in New York? I said, yes, this is the call I've been waiting for my whole life. No, I started my firm in the 90s, Cogent Consulting, and we do help people do good well, but no one really wanted to talk about impact investing until 2011, 2013. And then the phone has been ringing off the hook from all different types of foundations. I would say mainly private foundations, but in the last few years, the community foundations have come a calling. Cleveland Foundation, we did some great work with Christie's team in Des Moines. To me, place-based impact investing is the past, the present, the future. And I'm really excited to hear your questions and join the discussion today.
All right, thank you, Susan. I also want to turn it over to Stuart next. I think we'll go over to Stuart.
Great, thanks, Eric. Thanks, everybody. Nice to see you all. Quick note, I've been doing this kind of panel for over a decade, and they've changed so drastically. Back in the earlier days, there would be a handful of people and nobody was involved, but it really now is everybody. And it's also worth noting what Susan's point, private investment firms were doing some of these things in the 90s. MacArthur Foundation was doing this stuff really early, but there weren't many others. So I'm going to do three quick things, to talk about three quick things. One is, currently I'm at the Delaware Community Foundation. I've been here a little over 5 years. I'm going to talk about how we approach this. First, I'm going to talk about the Vermont Community Foundation, where I was the 8 years prior. And I'm going to say a few words about Mission Investors Exchange, which I think is a resource folks ought to know about if they don't. Vermont, Vermont Community Foundation in 2002 was moving their investment management to a national broker rather than a local firm. Said, we got to do something to keep money in the state. And at that point, set aside 5% of their endowment to be invested in local needs. And that was one of the earliest of the community foundations, before I was there, one of the earliest of the community foundations to do this. And at the time, there was really almost nobody to go to for help. Calvert did provide some advice at the time. This is one of the huge differences, because back then you could go to Calvert and maybe find somebody else. Today, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of really strong private investment advisors, impact investing advisors that can help you walk into this space. But at the time when Vermont set it up, it was largely CDFIs, because that's what they could figure out at the time. And it was very effective. And in the 2008 downturn, it meant that Vermont did better than most community foundations. It's an investment because they had so much in CDFIs. Over the time after that, we spent a lot of time starting to work with the board on being more aggressive and more creative in our impact investing, and also learning from all the folks in the field. And they've done a whole lot even since I left, and really impressive work. Second, when I talk about Delaware, I've done a little over 5 years. When I got here, we weren't doing anything in impact investing, but this is a place with a lot of private philanthropists who want desperately to be in this space. We've done board training, which has been effective in the board saying, yes, 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 yes. One of our challenges is, like a lot of medium and small community foundations, we don't have a lot of discretionary money. And so we have to get the donors to sign up as well. But what we've done in the meantime, as we start to build that interest, is we've been being opportunistic with other philanthropists in the area, with some private foundations and some banks and some private philanthropists. So we found ourselves in a number of interesting loans, one around a product that works with low-income people on Medicare, creating a banking mechanism for them. And I'm going to get briefed on where we are in that shortly. We've got a social impact bond that we're doing in partnership with Discover Bank and our largest private foundation. And meanwhile, we've also put money into CDFIs. So I'm happy to talk about this. One of the things I want to be clear about, whereas 10 years ago when I talked about this, I was kind of an expert, I don't feel like an expert anymore. I feel like we've all got stories, and they're all interesting stories, but each story is suited for that community foundation at that time, and we can build on each other, but I don't think there is a roadmap for any of us. Last point I want to make is about Mission Investors Exchange. Many of you may be members of MIE. It's the national organization focusing entirely on helping private or public and private philanthropy do impact investing. And we've been around now for, in one form or another, almost 20 years, became a separate organization about 4 years ago. I was chair of that until a year ago, but it's a place that tries to help new entrants to the space learn what it is, learn what impact investing is, to provide advice to foundations that are a little way down the road and build networks. Having said that, the many private consultants are providing much of the hands-on value to foundations that want to be in this space. And I'll stop with that and look for questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Stuart. Let's go on to Marcia too.
Hi, I'm Marcia Pope, president of the Topeka Community Foundation. And 5 years ago, I didn't even know what impact investing was. And now the Topeka Community Foundation has made its first impact investment and has a pipeline of other investments ready for us to vet and to make investments in. We really got into this work because in 2016, our strategic planning process led us to a place that said we really want to be the best that we can be for our community by leveraging our 3 roles in donor services, grant making, and community leading. At the same time that we were having these conversations, the equivalent of our chamber, the Greater Topeka Partnership, was having a holistic economic development discussion. And as a community, we were beginning a conversation that said community development is economic development. That really gave the Community Foundation a role to play in leadership. And so as we said, we want to lead on this issue, we don't know for sure what it is, which is a scary space to be in. We learned then we heard results from the Robert Wood Johnson health scorecard for Shawnee County, where Topeka is located. And what we learned is that our health was bad and getting worse in Shawnee County. And as we looked at that, 2 different things. One is we had made millions of dollars of grants in the area of health, and yet the health of our community was bad and getting worse. So we needed to look at ourselves and say, we have not gotten the outcomes that we were looking for. So what do we want to do differently? And then we also learned and started going deep on the social determinants of health, that a person's health is 20% their doctor, their access to healthcare, 20% their genetics, but 60% of their health is determined by the zip code that they live in. And so as you look at a zip code being more important to a person's health than their genetic code, we can do something about that. And so as we started looking at that, we really wanted to pour our assets into making a difference as we could around environments, systems, and policies, going upstream on this issue of community health and linking that community health being tied to economic development. And so as we did that work, we redid our grant making, of course, because those were the dollars that we had, and quickly realized we'll never be able to grant our way into the kind of progress that we want to make around this issue. And so as we looked at the kind of difference that we wanted to make, learned about the tool of impact investing, we said there are some assets that we're deploying around the world that could be used right here in Shawnee County to make the kind of difference that we want to make. And so when COVID hit, it really gave us the space to go deep on that. We weren't having donor events, we weren't having a scholarship reception, a women's fund luncheon. So we really put into place then all of the policies, the rubric that we use in order to score deals, in order to make investments, so that we could be clear on when coming out of COVID, we would have made internal progress on that work, worrying about what kind of pipeline we would have for these deals, and was assured that that wouldn't be a problem, and it's not. Our community is definitely ready for this work. And we've made a deal around, we've helped fund a daycare, a childcare education center in a childcare desert, and are currently working around affordable housing on 2 other deals that we have.
Thanks, Marcia. I appreciate it. The one thing I wanted to ask you all, kind of just starting out, I thank you all for your introductions and such and introductory remarks, is how did what challenges did you face when bringing this to your boards? Like, did they all understand what impact investing is? And perhaps you had to educate them on what it's not and what it is. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. So Stuart, I'm going to turn to you because you said you had some stories. So I'll turn to you and I'll go to Susan next.
Yeah, I'll tell stories from both places a little bit, and perhaps I'll drag in something from outside. At Vermont, our board had just kind of gone along with the decision from 2002 and not paid a lot of attention to it. So when we created a task force to talk about considerably expanding and focusing and doing investing in a venture capital fund that was looking at Vermont companies, there were many on the board who really struggled with the idea of giving up return. And that's the discussion that, as we've presented to other folks, we frequently hear that it's not fiscally prudent. So we had to get over that. And a lot of us have gone through those discussions. 10 years ago, those decisions were just coming out. So I think that's been resolved. But it was a fight on maximizing return, which is why the fact that I'll give that Vermont board credit, when they said 5% of the entire portfolio, they were using donor advised fund, agency funds, designated funds, everything. And I think most of us have a harder time doing that and instead look only at the discretionary dollars. As I've come to Delaware, I had said this was something I wanted to bring with me to Delaware. So the board was more open to it. But having said that, this is a heavy banking city. And so they are pretty cautious about it still. And we've had to prove successes with investments so that we can build more successes on top of that. Let me say, one of the real struggles we've had is with the donors. We had a project where we were investigating opportunity zones, and we worked with a number of researchers and banks all ready to do this, and we identified opportunity zone projects. But the board didn't want to use our money for that. We were trying to find other investors' money for the opportunity zone projects. And we kept hitting a wall because in that case, the investors said, but I want my return. Yeah, I care about what you care about, but I want my return. And so we did hit a wall on that.
Thanks, Stuart. Susan, next.
We're seeing all sorts of permutations on this, Eric. And I would agree with what Stuart said, the board involvement. There can be a lot of misconceptions even now about impact investing. Just the other day, I was on a call with an investment committee chair, and he assumed that all impact investing is below market rate impact investing. Whereas we know you can make money doing impact investing, you can have above market rate returns, you can do below market rate investing. It's just important to know what you're doing with what funds. So we're still seeing, usually there's some resistance. Usually I find on investment committees that there's a person on the board and in the investment committee that everyone kind of listens to about money. And it usually is a guy, not always, it usually is a guy, nothing wrong with that. What I will say, if that one person that everyone listens to about money is dead set against impact investing, it's kind of not worth having the conversation, unfortunately. You have to wait for that person to roll off the committee. But I will say, if that one person who has a lot of authority on and carries a lot of weight with the other board members about financial matters, if that one person has an open mind, we can get to them. We can talk to them. We can meet them where they are. You know, I'm a CFA, a chartered financial analyst. A lot of times that person is also a CFA. So CFA to CFA, we can talk about this as long as they have an open mind. One big don't that we've seen is when an executive director or president goes to a conference, might be a Mission Investors Exchange conference. We all love those. And then they come back and they're really excited, which is great. But then they go to the board, maybe the board gets excited, and then they go to the investment committee or the chief investment officer or the investment consultant, and they put a big stop on all of that momentum. And I think it's human nature. the people running our either our restricted funds or unrestricted funds, you know, they feel a sense of mission as well, and theirs is about fiduciary duty. And having a bunch of people come in and demand that they change the way they do their job usually doesn't go over very well. So we like to approach these as conversations. We like to do some education and get on the same page about what we're talking about, but then move swiftly to action. So I love what Marcia said about it. You know, it's kind of a 5-year process. We do see that used to be a 7-year process, but in the last year, that timeline from education to action, to policy, to strategy, to action is shortening. We're seeing it 1.5 years. We're seeing it even a few months. So I think the urgency of COVID and the racial unrest is causing boards and committees to act faster, but you still have to bring people along, get them onto the same page, not get out ahead of them, not tell the investment people how to do their jobs, but to take that time, even if it's just one meeting, so everyone is using the same terms to talk about the same concept, is a really important strategy.
Thanks, Susan. Marcia, I'm going to go to you, and it looks like we have something in the chat too I want to get to as well, directed at you, that I'll ask you about, so you can tell everybody about. But if you could answer the kind of question about the challenges in educating the board. Do they all know what impact investing was, and how did you go about educating them?
They didn't at the beginning, but to us, the reason that we were able to move this forward in the way that we did with such consensus on our board is because of the why. Everyone on our board was committed to making a difference in our community, especially in those neighborhoods that need our help the most. And so when the why of this is we now have triple the dollars that we have to invest in new ways, not just in grant making, but now we can support organizations that we couldn't support through our grant making, and that we can reuse these dollars, we can recycle these dollars and use them over and over. That really was the compelling reason why. And we talked about it at every board meeting. We worked at the Topeka Community Foundation with Locus Impact Investing. We had board virtual lunch and learns where they would, through Zoom, learn from and be able to ask questions of Locus. We had our partner from the Hutchinson Community Foundation. She came and presented in person, and we were able to ask questions there. So it wasn't like this is another crazy Marcia idea that's being brought to us. It's like other people in our state are doing this work, and we can do this too. So it just brought every meeting, everything that we had brought them another sense of comfortableness with this, but it really went back to our why, and that was deploying these dollars to make a difference in neighborhoods that really needed our help the most.
Eric, can I add something?
Yeah, go for it, Stuart.
The one of the big differences now, I think that most of the investment advisor firms now have been building out or have built out an impact investing portfolio. So, you know, again, a decade ago, that wasn't the case, but many of us have said to our advisors, we need this, you need to figure it out. And so people have hired teams. We currently work with SEI, and they've got a big team that looks at different impact investing opportunities, and they can bring them to us. And so when an investment committee member who maybe was the investment advisor for a museum or a university or whatever, hears from an investment expert who says, here's how impact investing investments are really working, it's kind of like to like. They speak the same language. That makes a huge difference. So I think one of the things we've seen in the MIE perspective now is getting somebody to speak to the committees who knows that language. It's important for the president of the foundation to be able to speak to it, but in the end, you also have to have somebody who's got the same credentials making that discussion, and that lowers barriers in an important way.
Thanks, Stuart. Marcia, follow up in the chat here. Were there any IRS implications for investing in for-profit entities? And Susan, I just wanted to say thanks for chiming in on the chat about one of the questions that came in. So Marcia.
No, I mean, the dollars would have been invested in for-profit companies around the world anyway. So these are just now invested in for-profit companies in Shawnee County which are now producing social good for our community.
Thank you. What about on the donor side? Were there any trepidations, any concerns there from donors? Were they concerned about the movement, the direction you were going? Susan, I'll turn it over to you on that question.
We're seeing tremendous interest from donors in local projects, and they don't know where to go and they don't know how to find them. We're seeing most interest from kind of the newer donors. So the millennials are starting to come into their own and starting to have money to donate, or they're inheriting their money and they're trying to figure out what to do with it. We're also seeing interest from women as well, driving these trends of donor interest. I would give a shout out to the Minneapolis Foundation for their Invest Minneapolis product. It's a $10 million fund that engages donors. But what few people know is years and years before that, they engaged donors in impact investing quietly, one-on-one, and they continue to do that. So I don't think it necessarily has to start with a big snazzy fund that with a beautiful brochure and a website. It can start quietly on a particular project that engages the community. In Minneapolis, for the Minneapolis Foundation, it was the building of the new Viking Stadium, the US Bank Stadium, to get more contractors of color engaged in that project. And they knocked the socks off that goal. They were hoping to get, I think, 25, 30% contractors of color, and they went way over 30%. But that was partly because the community foundation made below market rate loans, sometimes called program related investments, into some CDFIs that worked with contractors of color. And the CDFIs were MEDA and some other really great CDFIs who helped those contractors. So we're seeing ways to tiptoe into having the donors get involved. Another easy button for that kind of investing, the below market rate impact investing, would be the Venn Foundation, which only does program related investments, and they can work with the community foundation so that you can set up a Venn account for your donor. Venn then does all the impact investing, IRS, all the regulations and tax. They take care of all that for you. And then they make the investment, they get it back, and then they pay you back, and you can then recycle the money in your donor account. So that's another resource I would mention. And they have started, they are a national organization at this point.
Susan, what was the name of that organization again? Sorry, Venn?
Venn, I can put it in the chat.
Thank you very much, Susan. Appreciate it.
Are there others
Marcia,
like that?
Marcia, you want to speak to the challenges around donors? What was the reception of your donors?
Yeah, we recently rolled this out to our donors at a donor event this spring, and everything was very positive. If anything, we see this as a donor development tool, and that is probably spinning faster than I wish that it was, because we're not ready to begin that process. We have a structure in place where there are pooled assets, and 1% of our growth portfolio each year for the next 5 years will be used for impact investing. And we've got people who want to set up funds right now, and 100% of those go to impact investing. And we don't have the system or the process in place yet to do that. So they're anxious to join us in this work. And again, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but when the work that we're investing in is so compelling and people see the need for that in our community, the why behind this really is what has made this a success for us. And so when you have business owners who share a parking lot with us here at the Community Foundation who are interested in social good in our community, this is the first time that they've seen an organization in Shawnee County make this kind of commitment. And so they're wanting to set up donor advised funds, and they're wanting to partner with us in ways that we knew that was on our to-do list. It's not at the top yet. And so we're running as fast as we can to catch up with that. So it's been very positive, and we definitely see it as a donor development tool. Again, to Susan's point, with these entrepreneurial kinds of donors and with younger donors, giving circle kinds of investments, there's lots of possibilities for us.
All right, Stuart, comments on getting donors involved.
Yeah,
How is that?
Donors are definitely excited, and I definitely also see donors being motivated not first by the tool of impact investing, but by the issue, to Marcia's point. If you find something exciting, whether it's the Minneapolis Stadium project or in our case, a social impact bond for blood bank millennial collections, those are, people get excited about that kind of thing. And then they say, and how are you doing it? And you show them the tool and they say, oh, that's cool. You guys are really with it. This is very exciting. But I think early on, I was trying to convince people, just, isn't this a great idea? Don't you want to be part of our impact pool? And they say, well, show me a project and then we'll talk. And so that's my recommendation on that side.
We're getting some questions in here on the chat too, so I want to get to them. And Walker actually raised a question. Are there specific examples of a local impact investment project that wasn't debt financed, i.e. CDFIs, and produced an equity-like return? Can either one of you answer that question? I'm curious.
I could take a stab because I actually put out a query to our 150 members about any interesting things they're doing in impact investing. I got a really wild one back from the Brainerd Lakes Area Community Foundation. They actually are doing an investment into an angel investing fund to create more tech jobs in Brainerd. So I don't know if what their returns are yet. I think it's a new one, but I have seen, this is one of the only times I've seen a community foundation actually invest in an angel investing fund, but it's a really, we're seeing more and more interest in these kind of unusual structures and different rates of return. It's not an example of a community foundation, but I do have to give a shout out to the Gates Foundation because if any of you are Pfizer shot recipients, that was a program related investment, a below market rate program related investment that has now performed spectacularly well for the Gates Foundation. So there are examples of foundations who've made program related investments intending them to be below market rate. And then particularly when it comes to a disease or something like that, it can make they can get an extraordinary return from time to time.
Thanks, Susan. More things in the chat here. I'd be interested in knowing, this is from Carolyn, if community foundations investments are to other CDFIs for specific nonprofit projects in the community, or if the investments are directly to the organizations. Anyone want to take that one?
Probably all of them.
Yeah.
I know in our case, it's mostly been to CDFIs, although we've done a couple direct loans to nonprofits. I think there are some community foundations that have created, whether it's an official CDFI within their walls or a CDFI-like loan structure, probably both of those. So I think the answer is yes to all.
Thanks, Stuart.
I do find that CDFIs, assuming you've got a decent CDFI, it's a great way to get started and get the board comfortable with the idea of this money that will come back and that will create a return. It's understandable, depending on the CDFIs in your area, they can be a great partner and people may already know them. And you say, oh, this is about housing and about small business and maybe about daycare centers or whatever it is for your CDFIs. That can be a really powerful tool to start.
Yeah, and I don't have any kind of background in banking, so I'm not servicing loans. I'm not going out in our community and collecting bad debt. Should a loan, not should, but if and when. And that's another conversation that we had with our board, is complete transparency at the beginning, is that this is risky. And that the question is not, will a loan end up not being paid back someday, but when? And so being transparent with our board up front has really taken a weight off of my shoulders, because I don't feel the pressure that everything has to succeed and go on a certain timeline and meet certain, because that's just not the way that this works. So we use other partners to service the loans for us, and that's just not something that we're interested in doing.
If I can chime in on that, Eric, I highly recommend looking at what's available in your community before creating something new. Like Stuart said, there are many, many organizations now that are experts in impact investing or experts in your community. If it's not an official CDFI, maybe it's just a really great community organization that happens to have a loan fund. And so with the backing of the community foundation, it is wonderful. And we recommend having an intermediary just for some of the reasons Marcia mentioned. An intermediary can also protect the foundation against having to do uncomfortable things like foreclose on a nonprofit or go into a small business and in a kitchen and take away all their mixers because they defaulted on your loan. So, you know, things foundations really don't want to get into the business of doing, but sometimes have to be done in a loan situation. So I really recommend using intermediaries if you have them. Some communities don't, and then you got to create one.
And on that point, Susan, such a great point. It's also due diligence. When I talk to national big private foundations, the due diligence, they just moan about conducting effective due diligence, and they got resources. And so for us to be able to do good due diligence, it's not likely we've got the resources internally. Somebody asked about how you staff it. I think that's a really important reason why either your current investment firm or contracting with one of the many good people who do impact investing and having them help you conduct the due diligence before you do it and figure out how to monitor it over time.
Thank you, Stuart. I appreciate the follow through or the follow up questions and all the questions we're getting in the chat. So thank you very much to everyone. Another one, kind of on the theme of influencers, if you will, is Jesse was asking kind of the impact investing maybe being contingent upon one or two specific philanthropists partnered with a community foundation. Is that necessary? Do you need to have that kind of champion? Those are my words, not her words, but do you need to have that champion who's going to kind of lead the charge within a community foundation of donors who are also on board, if you will, with impact investing? Or do you feel like the community foundation can kind of go it alone and know that the donors will come along with them? Marcia, do you want to take that one?
In Topeka, I met with kind of under the radar some of our key donors and let them know that this was work that we were considering early on in the process, just to see if there were any red flags that I needed to know about, because we would have wanted to clear those questions up so that when this comes up in community conversations, I know that they're in the loop and they're supporting the work that we're doing. So had there been, and I did that not only with key donors, but key leaders in our community, government officials, there's just some people that you need to have in the loop supporting the idea of this work, even if they don't know specifically what you're doing, so that if there are people questioning this, they're telling your story for you. And so we didn't necessarily need the donors extra dollars to do this work, but I did need to know before I went charging forward that there was not going to be major pushback from certain donor leaders and community leaders in our community.
A follow-up question, Marcia, on that. As you've tracked over time, have you been able to communicate the return on investment either through dollars or through impact with your donor community or the broader community?
Yeah, we've just had that one loan that we've done. And so when we announced this in April to our donors, we did a video, and so it's this daycare center in East Topeka. And I don't know if anyone knows any of that, but it's a very low income, high crime, high poverty neighborhood where there was no childcare. And so in that video, we have a parent talking about what having their child in this safe place does, and how this child will be ready for kindergarten along with their peers now, and things like that. So telling those stories is important to this process, but we've only done one loan. And so having that kind of data to report that kind of return it's something we know and we're thinking about, but it's not something that we've done yet.
We've certainly told the stories of interesting impact investments in our regular materials. And we've shared those with anybody who has skin in the game. But we have not come up with a thorough report back on everything because there are all these, in our case, all these different pieces. Cincinnati historically did a really good job with that. And again, I'm not up to speed on where they are today, but I know when Kathy and I were working on this stuff together, she had really nice reports that she sent out to the people who invested in those. So she may be a resource.
Thanks, Stuart. Susan, did you want to add anything about, do you need that champion? Is it okay if the community foundation kind of goes it alone and waits for people to come along, or how do you feel?
I'd agree with Marcia. You never want your biggest donors to find out something in the news and have them ask a lot of questions about, and what the heck are you doing with my money? And is the community foundation still even a safe place? You know, a lot of individuals who are philanthropists have no idea about impact investing. Stuart mentioned the Mission Investors Exchange. That's all mainly foundations. It's not really high net worth individuals. Where do the high net worth individuals go? There are places for high net worth individuals to learn about impact investing. There are places for ultra high net worth individuals to learn about impact investing. There are clubs, Tonic, etc. But many people, especially in the Midwest, where I'm based, don't have any idea. They might be very generous or very civic minded, but they don't know about impact investing. So to bring them along and let them know about the kind of impact investing you're doing. I also think, though, talking about the tool can get real theoretical real fast. So I think Marcia was brilliant in talking about, child care center, or this is what our pipeline looks like, or partnering. I think she said that with the Rotary, to partner with an organization they know about, that they've heard about, and they can start to make sense of this with a particular need that they see in their community is really important.
Thanks, Susan. I want to follow up too on a question that Christy had too, is, do you have is there a specific group that actually leads this for you, a specific person within your community foundation, or perhaps Susan with community foundations that you work with? Did they have to expand staff? Did you have to expand staff? Marcia, do you want to take a stab at that one?
Do you see me laughing? Is that why you asked me? We're a staff of 4.5. And so taking this on, there's definitely some capacity issues being created here. And so it's in our plan in 2022 to bring someone else on board, freeing me up to work on this pipeline and to have these new kinds of conversations that we're having in our community. But it's definitely, the board has to realize when you take something like this on, that this isn't just something that you do on the side. It's a whole new conversation. It's a whole new set of people that you're talking to. It's whole new work.
I think it's awesome that you're doing it with such a small staff. So Marcia, compliments to you. Susan, do you want to chime in?
Sure. Most of the organizations we work with are small staffed. 2 people, 3 people, 5 people. So the exact same boat. I'm feeling your pain now, Marcia. I would say we see foundations move through a journey. So Marcia's talking about the end result of a 5-year journey. So I don't want people to feel like, oh my God, I've got to go hire an impact investing staff person and do all these things. You know what? We see people move from curiosity to learning to strategy to really all in doing it, like Marcia is. So if you're in the learning stage, great, try a few. It's easy to do one with a CDFI. They have rating reports called Aries reports. They're like the S&P and Moody's of CDFIs. So if you're not sure where to start, find a CDFI. If you don't have one in your community, do one in your state or your region, and go to one that has a really good Aries rating. And that's a great way to get started. It doesn't take a lot of staff. So as you move through your strategy, you can decide what staff you need. I would also say, going back to that example I started out with at the St. Paul, Minnesota Foundation, you do have staff, financial staff at a community foundation. You have a financial department. You're used to money coming in and money going out. Private foundations really struggle with just the cash flow aspect of impact investing. You guys have people who handle money and checks. So, and typically that's in-house. So you might have a CFO or a finance director who is a trained auditor or who's got a background in accounting. It is not hard to train that one person into how to monitor a loan to a CDFI. And if they're interested and willing, and a lot of people, especially people newer in their career, view learning about impact investing as a real bonus for their professional development because it's such a exciting current topic. So I would say very few foundations actually end up hiring a whole staff. I can think of the McKnight Foundation based in Minneapolis that has a couple of investment analysts at this point, and someone directing impact investing, but that's unusual unless you're on the coast and just doing this all the time. Typically you don't have to hire a new person. The other thing we're seeing community foundations do, use your volunteers. We've found there's a bunch of retired investment folks who sometimes are on your investment committee or used to be, and they would love nothing more than doing some due diligence on some loans or stretching their financial muscles. We've seen volunteers step up. And then as Stuart mentioned, there are a whole bunch of firms, et cetera, that provide this kind of work.
Pick up on a couple things there. I agree with everything that's been said here. First of all, I get it that like, how do we get started? And we've all been talking about CDFIs. They're such a great place to get your feet wet in this space because, as Susan said, they have to report. We can find out what they did with it. They typically have a track record of paying back loans. It's simple to understand and simple to report. And if you take out some of your bond portfolio and put it in CDFIs, you're probably not losing anything. In fact, you're probably getting a better return right now. And so that also makes people happy. So I think that's one of the important things. Another thing that we have done is what I call the sidecar investments in impact investing, where a private foundation, we become close to various private foundations and they say, hey, we want to do this. We've already conducted the due diligence. Would you be interested if we share that research with you? And so we lean on our ally colleague foundations or private philanthropists in some case and say, then present that to our investment committee. So it can be intimidating because there's so many different tools. I mentioned the social impact bond. That's incredibly complicated. We did something like a 60-page agreement. It was a pain in the behind and I had to do it. And I don't know anything. But that's not what you want to do. You want to start with really simple things and get a volunteer, another foundation, the intermediary to do that work for you. And you don't have to have a lot of staff. You just have to pay a little bit of attention to it and have the right people doing that. And you can get started in this space. And I do think Marcia said donors, the newer donors particularly get excited about this. As much as we may still be trusted in the world, people don't entirely trust anybody. And so if we can say you get to help direct the money and there may be return, they get excited about that because they think it's the new hip way to do our work. Even if it's not really, they feel like it is, and we might as well take advantage of that.
And I think too, one other thing is, especially in community foundations that do have a small staff, it needed to be me. The community trusts me. They know me. I'm the one so me going and having, even at the beginning when I really didn't understand, I told them, I don't really understand the nuts and bolts of all this, but here's our vision for the kind of difference that we can make. That conversation needed to be with me. That wouldn't have worked if we would have brought someone from the outside to do that.
The other thing I would jump in is go to your local council. We're here at the Council on Foundations, but do look at your local council because other members are probably asking the same question. So going to your own council on foundations. The other thing I want to pick up on is the power of positive peer pressure. Stuart mentioned getting to draft behind a private foundation that was doing some investing and do a sidecar with them. The other thing, the great way to convince donors or more boards is when you have other foundations doing it, even other private foundations. When you can shout out that this foundation, that foundation, the Cleveland Foundation is doing impact investing, suddenly it doesn't seem so scary and abnormal. It just seems like a normal part of business. The other piece I'd say is collaboration. Community foundations are great at that in your community, and you can collaborate on impact investing. So instead of having like 5 different investors commission 5 due diligence reports and 5 legal templates, you can actually do it together. We just did that in Minnesota. We collaborated on legal documents. We collaborated on due diligence. Some foundations still wanted more due diligence. That's fine. That's on them. Some foundations were like, great, that's enough due diligence for us. But you can all share it amongst each other, and then that'll save you a lot of time and a lot of money.
On that point, let me say, yes, refer to the Cleveland Foundation, but call the Topeka Foundation too, because you want not just the really big guys, but also smaller foundations. And you should feel comfortable calling people who are already in the space. People are more than willing to, by and large, to talk to another community foundation president, a board member, or investment committee chair. You're not going to probably have a hard time finding somebody who can talk to your board and just kind of talk about how and why.
Thank you. I know we're kind of getting close to short of time here real quick, but I do want to ask you, so it seems like you painted a really amazing picture about impact investing. And so what would be the hesitation that you would see maybe from your experience, or maybe your experience with other community foundations or such, or maybe your own community foundation? Like, if it's such an amazing thing, like, why isn't everybody doing this? Or is it just because there's a lack of awareness? Susan, do you want to take that?
Oh, thanks, Eric. I'll tell all the bad stories. Stuart talked about the importance of due diligence. So just because we're talking about doing good in the world doesn't mean there aren't some bad actors out there. Impact investing has gotten really popular. And as a trustee of a community foundation told me 6 years ago, Susan, it's only a matter of time before there's a Bernie Madoff of impact investing. And we actually have him now at the United Nations. He kind of convinced a whole bunch of big time players to invest in him. We've had examples of fraud. We've seen people end up in jail. Now, luckily, a community foundation did not get mixed up in any of that, but it's why we recommend using intermediaries and doing due diligence. We don't want to start interacting with for-profit entities thinking they're all like grantees. They're not. And you need to stop and do that financial due diligence. And if you don't have the skills in-house, you can hire that out or get your retired investment committee banker friend to do it. And then the legal due diligence. The lawyers will do that final step of a background check. Now, you don't want to put every single investment you're looking at on Marcia's pipeline through due diligence. You have to do it in a triaged way. And you would only put the ones through full due diligence that you're actually going to do. But if there's one thing I can just say to this group, you still have to use your business and financial mind. Don't leave that at the station. And that's a great role for your CIO, CFO, investment committee to be kind of the check. Did we do our due diligence on this?
Don't forget that, like, people trying to get investors into a private business are typically really good salespeople. So it can seem really compelling. We've got a story here of one of the nation's great opportunity zone successes, so-called. And there's a story in the paper on Sunday. They're being sued by 4 different entities for not paying bills. We didn't get in on that one because our due diligence said, we're not sure we trust this guy. But they got millions of dollars into this operation, and it was always a little slippery. And he may come out of it okay, but you need to be careful with the right intermediaries and the proper due diligence, which again is why if you're not doing it at all, CDFIs are such a great place to begin.
And then I think besides the business side of it, strategically, a community foundation might not be in the right place to do this kind of work. We had made a decision that we were going to, we wanted to do transformational as opposed to transactional kinds of work in our community. And so after making that strategic decision, impact investing was a great tool for us to do that. But if you are writing, if you're a community where you're writing checks and that's what you want to do is support lots of organizations and you want to include there's just lots of different ways community foundations can operate, and perhaps doing transformational kind of work and spending a lot of time working deals and doing due diligence isn't the right role for you to play to be the best community foundation that you can be for your community.
Amen.
So I want to give you all a couple of moments, a few final thoughts before I turn it over to Christy. But, if you could just sum up like where to start, where should somebody start if they're looking to get into this space? How should they start? Susan?
learn, connect, commit, and do have a sense of urgency. Our country is just experienced, and the world has experienced this health calamity, but we've also experienced right up front the racial disparities and problems in our country. We just don't have time to waste. I think about all of your foundations. How did they get started? It's because a group of people who were successful cared about your place. So I'd say channel their energy and look at your place like Marcia did with what's working, what isn't working. And let's try some new tools to address the problems facing us. So learning is great, connecting with others like you are right now, but then committing to at least try one, at least do one to a CDFI, or even a deposit into a community bank that you, or a credit union that is doing some, that you know is doing some good in your community. You can start with your cash and with kind of very stable investments.
Stuart.
Yeah, I want to double down on what Marcia said too. This is a tool. It's not the be all end all of tools. I agree with Susan that we've got urgency about everything we're doing, but it doesn't mean that this has to be your space. And if you're not doing it, it doesn't mean you're a failure. So make sure you're doing it for the right reasons, about mission, about delivering on impact. There are a lot of good benefits for building your asset base, building your donor base, building your influence, but make sure you're doing it for the right reasons.
Go ahead, Marcia.
Yeah, and I would say the most important decision we made was our why for doing it. Once we knew that, then that informed every other decision that we made. So if you have a compelling why for doing this work, then you just take the next step and you do that, and then you take the next step and you do that. And it all goes back to your why and being the best that you can for your community.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. We really appreciate you all participating in the webinar here on impact investing. Again, we'll have a second session with more deeper questions and more opportunity to ask your questions. I'm going to turn it over to Christy right now.
Yes, thank you all so much. This was, to me, enlightening, empowering, and it made me feel normal because we've been working on this for about a year, just learning about it. And so I'm learning even more today. Eric, thank you for partnering with me in planning this, and Daniela with the Council of Foundations. Eric, you do a great job moderating, so we appreciate that. Our discussants today, which I don't know if that's a real word, but we use it in this world. Susan, thank you. Your expertise are so helpful, and just all of your examples. So we'll see you next week, right? You'll be on the call. And Stu, thank you. You'll be on next week. We're grateful for you and all you're doing in Delaware. Marcia, thanks for joining us today from Topeka. I know you can't be here next week, but we do have Deb Markley with Locus Impact Investing joining us. So we'll round out the panel with that. So don't forget to register if you haven't already for next Tuesday, same time, same place. Tell your other colleagues or peers around your state or others that you interact with about it. This will be recorded, so that will be shared with you. So that you can even share it beyond this with some of your staff that might be interested. I actually have a board member who's helping us lead this, and he's going to be interested in this conversation today. And thanks for the council for partnering with CEONet on this. I do hope that you'll consider learning more about CEONet at cfceonet.org. We are currently recruiting founding members for CEONet as we get that started with $1,000 one-time contribution. We'll be doing that through the end of this year. We currently have had 46 founding members to help CEONet get started. We'll be offering more roundtables in partnership with COF, but also resources on that website, retreats, and other things down the road. And we could sure use help in planning. So if any of you are interested in serving on the board or on a committee, you can get in touch with me. Last name Knous, Knous at DesMoinesFoundation.org. That's all spelled out, or cfceonet.org. So thanks again for joining us today. We'll get you out of here right on time. And we hope to see you right here next week, same time, same place. In the meantime, keep doing good work in your communities, and thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good afternoon.
Great to see your faces.
Bye.
Hi, Daniela.